So this video is going to be a bit different. There are very few things that bring everyone together, but I think something that everyone can agree on is that 2020 is kind of a crappy year. You know what, let's go all in. The 21st century has been kind of crappy. Across the last 2 decades, even if we just look at America, we had a major terror attack that literally defined our nation for a time, a once-in-a-lifetime economic collapse that happened twice, and a once-in-a-century pandemic that has killed upwards of 1/3 people. The 21st century has been doing its best to speedrun humanity, but one of the bright spots that has almost never failed to come through is Disney and Pixar. Sure, they definitely do have missteps, but by and large, across the last 20 years, they have released some of the most phenomenal and famous movies ever. And when you watch them, you kinda can't help but just smile. That's the beauty of Disney and Pixar. They have this down to a formula. They know how to pull on your heartstrings almost on command. It's watching these lovable, flawed characters strive to get something they so desperately want, and against all odds, actually getting it. But even more than that, Disney and Pixar have taken the opportunity to use some of their movies as an exploration, or really a celebration, of not so talked about cultures. I still remember losing my mind when Moana was announced. For as long as I can remember, I have been captivated by Hawaiian culture. Honestly, I think it started with Lilo and Stitch, another favorite movie of my childhood, and it just kind of grew from there. And if I want to be really honest with myself, I think my starry-eyed gaze at Hawaiian culture comes from the fact that, as an African American, it represents something that I will never have. I think it's one of the coolest things in the world that Hawaiians are able to have this close tie to their ancestors, their heritage, and their true culture, going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. Having a homeland that you are connected to and a language you can speak that's your own, all while navigating being joined to the United States, a situation that was more forced than chosen. As an African American, apart from being in the US, I don't really have any of that. The farthest back in my family that I know is my great-grandparents, and then that's it. I don't have a connection to Africa. I don't know where my family comes from, and the only language I speak originated in Europe. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't culture within the Black community, there certainly is. But when I look at Hawaii, I do find myself in awe of how deep the roots of their personal, unique culture goes, and how far back they can trace it. I've never had the privilege of going to Hawaii, so Moana is literally as close as I've ever been, and while I do recognize it is fiction, I think seeing the island of Motunui and its people acted as a really cool window for folks like me who may never actually firsthand experience Hawaiian culture. Disney's choice to focus a movie on exploring and celebrating this minority culture was a real treat for me. But it didn't prepare me at all for their next big cultural foray, Coco. Now, something you should know about me is that I grew up in the San Fernando Valley of Southern California. My entire childhood was spent surrounded by Hispanic and Latino culture. My friends were Dongos and Trujillos and Quesadas and Velasquezes. My favorite lunch was the mojado burrito from Los Tres Hermanos. The parties had piñatas and all the billboards had enyes. If there was one other culture that I knew aside from Black, it was Latino. So of course, when Coco was announced, I was a bit skeptical. What was Disney going to do with this movie based on this complex and storied culture so close to my upbringing? Well, blow out my freaking tear ducts, that's what they did. If Moana was a celebration of Hawaiian culture, Coco was a block party. Never before had I seen such a beautiful fusion, a seamless marriage of narrative storytelling and cultural recognition. From top to bottom, I consider Coco to be borderline flawless, not only for the story it was able to tell, but for the way it was able to integrate so many aspects of Mexican heritage without ever being obnoxious. For me, that film set a new standard for what animated storytelling could do in terms of giving light to culture. And of course, that then leads us to June of 2019 when Pixar announced their next big animated film, Soul. Now, as crappy as 2020 is and was, one of my favorite memes to come from the year was the public reception around Soul's announcement. The initial teaser trailer for the film evoked large feelings of Inside Out, showing us a possible exploration of our black main character's soul. This, of course, led to one of my all-time favorite jokes: Pixar 1996, what if toys had feelings? Pixar 2006, what if rats had feelings? Pixar 2007, what if cars had feelings? Pixar 2015, what if feelings had feelings? Pixar 2020, what if black people had feelings? Now, I know that might seem like a pretty cynical take for a G-rated animated movie, but African-American representation in big-budget films has had a pretty up and down past. I still remember being super excited back in 2007 that the Autobot Jazz was very obviously supposed to be black.
This looks like a cool place to kick it.
I also remember being extremely disappointed when he was the only Autobot to die. That disappointment turned into straight up anger when, in a later movie, 2 more black Transformers were introduced, though they exclusively spoke in slang, had gold teeth and grills, and couldn't read. Whether we want to go way back in the past to Scrub Me Mama with the Boogie Beat, which literally depicted black people as cotton-picking monkeys from Lazy Town, or stay relevant with this wonderful scene from Knock Knock.
I'm from Oakland, ho! I know 2 ghetto assholes when I see them.
There are lots of examples of squandered black representation. But again, it hasn't been all bad. Recent years have given us 4 of the most iconic black-led movies of all time, those being Into the Spider-Verse, Black Panther, Get Out, and Us. These films built up a lot of goodwill between Hollywood and the black community, and showed that there definitely are ways to strike a middle ground between showing black culture and stereotyping it. And that same goodwill was built up, at least in kind, by Disney and Pixar when they made Moana and Coco. I know that when I saw that the next Pixar movie was going to focus on a black jazz musician, I was simultaneously worried and excited. The worry came from me hoping that the film wouldn't completely drop the ball with what it was trying to do, but the excitement came from looking forward to black culture getting the same treatment that Hawaiian and Mexican culture did. I went into Soul with the same expectation of exploration and celebration of what it means to be black in America. And that's not what I got at all. Don't get me wrong, there are definite integrations of black culture in the movie, and most of them are really well done. Barbershop visits and the relationships you form at them are a real thing. Jazz and rhythm and blues are huge parts of black history. But the focus on Joe Gardner's black heritage was much less pronounced than the focus on Miguel's Mexican heritage, or even Moana's heritage. And as much as you might be hearing that these things are negatives as failures to meet my expectations, they're not. In fact, I'm actually really happy with how the movie turned out. Because what the movie did choose to focus on had nothing to do with Joe Gardner's race. And that's really refreshing and borderline admirable. So often when black characters are shown on screen, the narrative surrounding them becomes about their blackness. Their struggles center on overcoming poverty or addiction or racism or fighting against an oppressive social power. And yes, it is important to tell those stories because they can be a part of the black experience. But in the same breath, fiction isn't supposed to just depict what we are. It's supposed to depict everything we aren't, but aspire to be. Black people are more than their racial struggles. Black people are people. And no matter how many things are wrong with the Star Wars sequel trilogy, and there are a lot, I will always appreciate Finn for that reason. He is an important character in the story, but he also just happens to be dark-skinned. The story doesn't fawn over his pigment or the troubles it may have caused him. He's just a troubled human being just like everyone else. Miles Morales is just a troubled human being like everyone else, but he's just black. And Joe Gardner is just a troubled human being like everyone else, but he's just black. And that restraint, the focus on the humanity behind the skin of the man, is what allows Soul to truly be different. At the beginning of this video, I talked about the things that Disney and Pixar movies typically do to make us smile, the formula they follow. And to put my editor's hat on now, it's all pretty by the book. They have a charismatic protagonist who is thrust into action by way of an extraordinary inciting incident. This protagonist is usually accompanied for large portions of time by a side character who is just as much of a hindrance as a help. The conflict for these two characters is usually a race against the clock, and the goal is to stop some horrible thing from becoming permanent. The climax and resolution sees these characters go through a personal transformation, overcome the conflict, get what they desired all along, and become emotionally fulfilled by it. To put it quite literally, Disney, Pixar, and honestly most stories revolve around characters striving to accomplish a singular goal that will course correct their life and give them satisfaction. And for 90% of the film, Soul is no different. Joe and 22 are in a time crunch and are each striving to course correct their life by achieving a specific goal. And honestly, I believe the most beautiful and profound part of this film is that instead of trying to subvert the narrative structure by keeping Joe from getting what he wants, the movie subverts the structure by just giving it to him. Joe gets what he wanted. He won. He is in the same position that every other Disney and Pixar protagonist longs for, that they've been in, where they achieve true happiness by realizing their one goal. Except Joe doesn't become instantly happy, because that's not how life works. That's the biggest difference between Soul, typical storytelling, and life in general. Characters and stories are fulfilled because they set their eyes on a task and get it done. And all of us in the real world have fallen into the habit of telling each other the same thing. Go to college and you'll be happy and successful. Get a job and you'll be happy and successful. Start a family and you'll be happy and successful. Yet we do these things and we don't feel happy or successful, but the trap is that we've been trained to by the stories we've been told. The remarkable narrative crux of Soul is that life is a journey that has been packaged as a destination. About a year ago, I made a video on The Boys, detailing how some stories gain power simply because they are told at the right time to the right audience. That sentiment applies 1,000-fold to Soul. It really exemplifies the impact of timely storytelling. Many of you may be looking back at your year of solitude and lockdown during this pandemic and thinking you have achieved nothing and amounted to nothing. You didn't finish the next great American novel, get the job, or get shredded. Just like Joe, so many of us define our lives in relation to some far-off goal. Our passion becomes our prison, and we view each day not achieving it as an indictment on ourselves. But life itself is an achievement, and as a counselor working in mental health, I am so happy that message is being broadcasted loud and clear by one of the largest companies on the planet. I don't know who needs to hear this today, but life is worth living, because life is what you make of it. Is Soul the biggest and best Pixar movie? Probably not. Does it weave a narrative steeped in Black culture? No. But does it deliver a message that is desperately needed and that can't be found in nearly any other recent fiction? Yes. And that is why Soul is so wonderfully different. Anyway, thank you all for watching until the end. If you like what you heard, like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to really help out, support the channel on Patreon or check out my novel on my personal website. I'll leave links in the description. As always, it was a pleasure, and I'll talk to you all again soon.